The sun bled through the glass walls of coal industries, painting the marble floors in molten gold. Emily knelt on the cold tiles, her trembling hands clutching the paper that would end her career. Across from her, Adrian Cole, the man whose signature could unmake empires, crouched to meet her eyes. His face was carved from stone, no mercy, no flicker of warmth. The world outside slowed, and only her ragged breath filled the silence between them. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely a thread. The termination notice shook in her hands. "Don't fire me. I'm pregnant." The words cracked open the sterile air, too raw to take back. Adrian's pupils tightened, the muscles in his jaw twitching, as if something deep inside him had been disturbed. The empire around him, glass, steel, perfection, suddenly felt fragile. He didn't speak. For a long, unbearable moment, he simply looked at her. The woman who'd once brought him coffee exactly the way he liked it, no foam, 2 sugars, now knelt before him, her life unraveling at his feet. Her eyes shone with terror, and yet there was something else there too. Defiance. She wasn't begging for pity, she was fighting for her child. The paper slipped from her grasp, fluttering across the floor like a fallen feather. It stopped near his polished shoes. Adrian glanced down, the words termination notice catching the fading light like a blade. He had signed it. His own hand had written her sentence, yet now that ink burned his conscience more than any contract he'd ever broken. "Get up," he said finally, his tone even, unreadable. Emily obeyed, but her knees wobbled. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, leaving a faint streak of mascara on her wrist. He looked at her, not the assistant, not the mistake, but the human being trembling before him. Something shifted, almost imperceptibly behind his eyes. And before we go any further, stop for a second and imagine this moment was real. What would you do if you were Adrian Cole? Follow company policy or listen to your heart? If this scene already hit you right in the chest, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments. Do you believe people like him can change? Your answer might surprise you more than what comes next. Back to the story. Adrian turned away, pacing toward the window where the skyline burned with evening light. His reflection looked older than he remembered, a man haunted by the ghosts of every choice he'd made in the name of control. Behind him, Emily's quiet sob broke through the glassy stillness, soft but shattering. He remembered another office, another plea, his mother's voice years ago, begging his father for one more chance before being cast aside. That memory, long buried beneath ambition, clawed its way back to the surface. He closed his eyes, fighting the echo of it, the weight pressing against his ribs. Emily watched him, unsure whether hope or despair would come next. The air between them felt charged, electric, trembling with all the words neither dared to say. Adrian exhaled slowly, turning to face her again, the sunset gilding his features with something almost human. For the first time in years, Adrian Cole didn't know what to do. The empire that had made him feared, the man who never hesitated, now stood frozen, torn between policy and compassion. The unthinkable was no longer a line he could see. It was a choice staring back at him, waiting to be made. The alarm never rang. Emily woke to the pale grey of dawn leaking through cheap blinds, her phone lying dead beside a frayed charger. Panic struck before her feet even hit the floor. She'd promised herself she'd never be late again, not to his meetings. But the universe had other plans. She rushed to the sink, splashing cold water on her face, trying to wash away the exhaustion of too many sleepless nights and one secret she hadn't dared to say aloud. Her reflection in the mirror looked foreign, pale skin, swollen eyes, and the faintest tremor in her lip. "You can do this," she whispered, half prayer, half lie. The nausea hit mid-sentence, folding her over the sink as tears blurred her vision. 6 weeks, the doctor had said. 6 weeks that had turned her world into a tightrope she wasn't sure she could walk. She breathed through the dizziness, clinging to the edge of the counter like it could hold her life together. By the time she reached the bus stop, the morning had already betrayed her. The bus she relied on hissed away in the distance, its taillights vanishing like hope itself. Rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, soaking her thin blouse until it clung to her skin. She didn't bother to cover herself, she just ran. The streets smelled of asphalt and coffee, and each puddle splashed like the ticking of a clock she couldn't stop. At the corner cafe, a kind stranger noticed her shivering and handed her a napkin. Emily smiled weakly, whispering a thank you before darting away. Every second mattered now. The weight of her unborn child pressed on her chest like a silent plea. Keep going. She thought of the tiny heartbeat she'd seen on the screen, the proof that her life wasn't hers alone anymore. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Not now. When she finally reached her apartment again to grab the forgotten report, she knocked over her only framed photo, her and her mother both smiling in sunlight, the glass cracked right down the middle, splitting their faces in two. It felt like an omen. She froze for a heartbeat, then forced herself to leave it behind. There was no time for sentimentality, only survival. The city subway swallowed her in its metallic roar. She stood between strangers in suits, their perfume sharp, their faces indifferent. Emily gripped the pole and tried not to cry. In her mind, she rehearsed every excuse she could give Adrian Cole: traffic, delay, illness. But none sounded strong enough to survive his stare. Her heart pounded faster than the train beneath her feet. When she arrived at Cole Industries, the sky had already cleared. The building rose before her like a monument to perfection, glass, steel, and power. She stared up at it, catching her breath, her reflection fractured across the mirrored doors. Somewhere inside that tower, her future waited to be decided by a man who didn't even know her story. She squared her shoulders and walked in. The reception desk gleamed, untouched by human chaos. "You're late," said the guard, not cruelly, just as fact. Emily forced a smile, signing in with a trembling hand. Her ID beeped weakly against the scanner. Every second echoed in her skull. The elevator doors opened, swallowing her in silence. As the numbers climbed, her nerves tightened like strings ready to snap. She checked her reflection in the mirrored wall, wiped a streak of rain from her cheek, and straightened her blazer. Behind the nervousness, there was something else. Resolve. She might be scared, but she wasn't broken. Not yet. When the elevator stopped, the doors slid open to reveal the executive floor, quiet, polished, merciless. Through the glass ahead, she could already see movement, people seated, voices hushed, and a vacant chair where she should have been. The meeting had started without her. Her pulse spiked as she stepped forward, and waiting inside that room was the man who would soon change everything. The conference room gleamed like a stage, all glass, chrome, and polished confidence. At the head of the long black table, executives sat in perfect formation, their pens aligned, their faces carved in judgment. The hum of air conditioning was the only sound until the door burst open and Emily stumbled in, breathless. For one fleeting second, every head turned toward her like predators scenting blood. Miranda Vale, the chief operating officer, didn't even hide her smile. She adjusted her silk blouse and said, "How nice of you to finally join us, Emily." The sarcasm dripped like venom. Emily's cheeks burned, but she muttered an apology and took her seat, the only empty one. The chair creaked, echoing through the sterile room. No one else dared make a sound. Adrian Cole entered moments later. The air changed. He didn't speak, he didn't need to. The sheer presence of him demanded order. He walked past Emily without a glance, setting his coffee cup down so softly it felt like thunder. "Let's begin," he said. His voice was calm, But beneath that calm lived something sharp, dangerous. Miranda stood first, her slides flashing on the massive screen. "Restructuring means efficiency," she announced, her tone bright but cold. "And efficiency starts with eliminating redundancies." She didn't look at Emily when she said it, but she didn't have to. Everyone in the room knew who the example would be. The air tasted metallic, electric. Emily's stomach twisted. She flipped through her notes, hands trembling, praying she hadn't missed anything. The numbers she'd prepared for weeks stared back, crisp and precise. Her safety net. But Miranda wasn't playing fair. "Oh, and before we proceed," Miranda said, her eyes cutting toward Adrian, "Emily failed to circulate the revised start time for today's meeting. That's why she's late." A murmur rippled through the room. Emily froze. I didn't get a notice about a change," she stammered, looking around for support. No one met her eyes. The silence was worse than accusation. Adrian's expression didn't move, but his gaze was heavy, pinning her in place like a specimen under glass. Miranda smirked behind her tablet. Adrian turned to Emily. "You're saying you weren't informed?" His tone was neutral, but his eyes were searching for something, truth or weakness. Emily swallowed hard. "No, sir, I wasn't." Her voice wavered, but she didn't look away. For a heartbeat his stare lingered, unreadable. Then he nodded once and said, "Continue, Miranda." Miranda went on, slicing through her presentation with surgical precision. Graphs rose, profits spiked, and names, real people, appeared in red under proposed cuts. Emily's name was there. She felt the blood drain from her face, but she didn't move. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She had worked late every night for this company, and now she was just another number to erase. The meeting ended in applause. Only Adrian didn't clap. He stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the screen like it was a mirror he didn't recognize. "Send me the termination recommendations," he said quietly. Miranda nodded, victorious. Emily sat frozen, her notes scattered across the table like broken glass. As the room emptied, Adrian glanced once more toward Emily, not long enough to offer comfort, but long enough to notice the shimmer of tears she refused to shed. His expression flickered. Guilt? Memory? Then it was gone. The glass door closed behind him with a whisper, sealing her fate. But somewhere deep inside him, something had already begun to crack. The day dragged on in a haze of whispers and glances. Emily sat at her desk, fingers hovering uselessly over her keyboard as the weight of humiliation pressed down like lead. Every vibration of her phone made her flinch. She knew what was coming. HR's call, the meeting invite with her name and performance review in the subject line. Still, she hoped. Hope, after all, was the one thing she hadn't learned to fire. At 3 o'clock, her email pinged. The subject was short and sharp. Meeting, 3:15 p.m. No explanation, no recipient list. Just an order. She stood, smoothing her skirt, her heart hammering against her ribs. The hallway felt longer than usual, its white walls humming with fluorescent judgment. Each step echoed the words she'd overheard all morning. She blew it. She's done. When she entered the small conference room, Miranda was already there, perfectly composed, tablet in hand. The blinds were half-drawn, slicing sunlight into bars across the floor. "Emily," Miranda said sweetly, "thank you for coming. Adrian asked me to handle this personally." That word, personally, dripped poison. Emily sat down, gripping her notebook like a shield. Miranda smiled, all teeth. "It seems there was some confusion with the schedule this morning." Emily's stomach turned. "I never got the revised invite," she said carefully. "I checked twice." Miranda's eyes gleamed. "Yes, about that. The notice was sent to the entire team at 7 a.m. You didn't see it?" Emily shook her head. Miranda tilted hers. "Strange. Must have been a technical issue." Something inside Emily twisted. She had checked. There was no notice. But confronting Miranda felt like stepping onto thin ice. "I'll review my inbox again," Emily said softly. Miranda nodded with mock sympathy. "Please do. We can't have misunderstandings at this level. Adrian expects precision." The words hit like darts, not shouted, but cruelly calm. The conversation turned clinical. Miranda scrolled through a performance summary, mostly praise, but highlighted every minor flaw with exaggerated concern. "Missed one follow-up here, a typo there." She sighed dramatically. "It all adds up, doesn't it?" Emily sat silent, her pulse roaring in her ears. It didn't add up. None of it did. When Miranda handed her the printed notice, the letters blurred behind Emily's tears. "Effective immediately," it read. The world seemed to tilt. She looked up, meeting Miranda's unblinking eyes. "You planned this," Emily whispered. Miranda smiled faintly. "Planned? No. Corrected." Her manicured hand tapped the paper once. Final. Absolute. Emily left the room in a fog. The chatter outside dimmed, faces turning away as she passed. Somewhere deep inside, anger sparked beneath the grief. She knew she'd been set up. Someone had moved that meeting on purpose. But who had the authority and the motive to make sure she took the fall? Down the hall, behind his glass office wall, Adrian watched her leave. He didn't know why he couldn't look away. The light caught on the document in her hand, and something in his chest tightened. He told himself it was procedure, nothing more. Yet as she disappeared into the elevator, a shadow of doubt slipped quietly into his thoughts. By the time the doors closed, Emily's reflection stared back at her, pale, shaking, but not broken. Beneath the humiliation, resolve began to form like stone beneath fire. She wiped her tears, took a breath, and whispered to herself, "They think I'll stay quiet. They're wrong." The trap had sprung, but she wasn't done fighting yet. The elevator doors opened to a hallway that buzzed faintly with the hum of fluorescent lights. Emily stepped out, clutching the termination notice like it was a live wire. Around her, co-workers pretended not to look. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Keyboards went silent. Shame, she realized, had a sound, the suffocating quiet that follows a fall. She walked faster, her heels clicking like small acts of defiance. When she reached her cubicle, she sat down slowly, the paper trembling in her hands. The ink was still fresh. Her name, her position, her dismissal, so clean, so final. 6 years of loyalty reduced to a single paragraph. Her breath hitched, and she pressed a hand against her stomach as another wave of nausea rolled through her. "Not now," she whispered to herself. But her body didn't care about timing or dignity, it cared about survival. Inside her drawer, hidden beneath sticky notes and pens, was a small folded ultrasound photo. She pulled it out with shaking fingers. The image was blurry, grainy, a tiny heartbeat suspended in darkness. She stared at it until her tears blurred the paper. "I'm so sorry," she murmured to the child she hadn't meant to carry alone. The thought of telling Adrian, of admitting it, terrified her more than losing her job. Her phone buzzed. A message from HR, "Please return your badge and company property by 5 p.m. Her time had run out. She gathered her things in silence, sliding the ultrasound photo into her coat pocket. Around her, the office air felt sterile and heavy, the scent of disinfectant mingling with the metallic tang of despair. Every step toward the exit felt like walking through quicksand. Halfway down the corridor, she saw Adrian's reflection in the glass wall of his office. He stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on something distant. The skyline, maybe, or his own reflection. For a second, their eyes met through the glass. It wasn't long enough to mean anything, but it wasn't empty either. There was a flicker of something human there, gone before she could name it. Emily turned away quickly, wiping her cheeks. She couldn't let him see her cry, not him, not the man who could end her career with a signature, but beneath her humiliation burned a quiet fury. He hadn't asked why. He hadn't even looked at her when Miranda handed him the papers. How could someone so powerful be so blind? As she walked past the conference room, she overheard fragments of conversation, Miranda's voice, sharp and triumphant, echoing against the glass. Handled professionally, policy is policy. The words stung. Policy. That's what they called cruelty when they needed to feel righteous. Emily stopped at the door, gripping the notice so tightly the paper nearly tore. Then she kept walking. By the time she reached the lobby, her hands had stopped shaking. Outside, the city glowed under the fading light, busy and indifferent. She stepped onto the sidewalk, inhaling the scent of rain and exhaust. Somewhere above her, Adrian's office lights flickered on. She imagined him there, cold, precise, untouchable, and wondered if he'd already forgotten her. But she hadn't forgotten him. The man who'd built an empire on discipline and detachment was about to learn what it felt like to face someone with nothing left to lose. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the faint pulse beneath her skin. "You deserve more than this," she whispered. "We both do." And in that moment, a decision formed. Reckless, desperate, unstoppable. She would tell him. She would tell Adrian Cole the one truth that could change everything, not for pity, but for the chance to be seen. The elevator climbed in silence, the hum of its cables the only heartbeat Emily could hear. Her reflection wavered in the mirrored walls, a pale face framed by fear, a woman about to gamble what little she had left. She clutched the ultrasound photo in her palm, its corners digging into her skin. "Just tell him," she whispered. "Tell him the truth." The words felt heavier than the air she breathed. When the doors opened, the executive floor stretched before her, quiet, cold, immaculate. Her heels clicked softly as she approached Adrian's office. Through the glass, she saw him standing alone, his jacket off, sleeves rolled up, staring at a stack of reports he didn't seem to read. For the first time, he looked tired. Not weak, not beaten, but human. She raised her hand and knocked. He didn't turn. "Come in," he said flatly. She stepped inside, her pulse hammering. "Mr. Cole, please, I just need a minute." Her voice cracked, but she didn't back down. Adrian finally looked up, and for a moment the room froze. The sight of her there, trembling, tear-streaked, holding that notice, caught him off guard. He set down his pen slowly, as if afraid to shatter something invisible. "I know you've made your decision," she began, her breath shallow. "But there's something you don't know. Something I should have told you sooner." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the ultrasound photo, placing it gently on his desk. Adrian's eyes fell to it, his jaw tightening. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. The words hung between them, fragile and impossible to ignore. Silence. He stared at the image, a tiny shape in grey and white, as though it were written in a language he no longer understood. "You're saying," he started, but the words died on his tongue. She nodded. "And I know what this means for my job. I know how this looks, but please, don't take this from me. I can't lose everything at once." Her voice trembled, but her eyes stayed fixed on his. Adrian leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. For years, his world had been ruled by policy, precision, control. But now, sitting across from him, was something no rulebook could quantify: raw, human vulnerability. "Does anyone else know?" he asked finally. She shook her head. "Not yet. I was going to wait until it was safe. Her hand hovered protectively over her stomach. He noticed the faint bruise on her wrist, the way she bit her lip to keep from crying. For a moment, the office didn't feel like glass and steel anymore. It felt small, personal, too intimate for the weight of what she'd just said. He wanted to look away but couldn't. There was something in her honesty that disarmed him, stripped away every layer of detachment he'd built. "Emily," he said slowly, "you should have told me." His tone wasn't sharp this time. It was softer, uncertain. She shook her head. Would it have mattered? The question lingered, sharp but fair. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked down at the ultrasound again, the faint flicker of a heartbeat caught forever in ink and light. The silence stretched, but it wasn't cruel. It was the kind that precedes change, a breath before a storm, or before mercy. Emily's chest tightened, waiting for judgment, for pity, for dismissal, but Adrian only said, "Go home for today." She blinked. "That's it?" He nodded. "Go home." His voice was calm, but beneath it lived something he hadn't felt in years. Hesitation. As she turned to leave, her eyes met his one last time. For the briefest instant, the ruthless billionaire wasn't there. Instead, she saw a man, weary, conflicted, and for the first time since the morning began, Emily felt something she thought she'd lost completely: hope. The next morning, coal industries buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Rumors spread faster than coffee, twisting truth into spectacle. He stopped the firing. She begged. He actually felt sorry for her. Emily kept her head down as she stepped off the elevator, her badge still miraculously active. Every whispered sentence seemed to trail behind her like smoke. She wanted to vanish, but she couldn't afford invisibility now. In his office, Adrian Cole was already rewriting the rules. HR had gathered in confusion, their laptops open, waiting for instructions that didn't come from Miranda Vale. "The termination is on hold," he said flatly, "until I review it myself." The words dropped like stones. HR exchanged uneasy glances. No one questioned Adrian Cole, not ever, and yet here he was, undoing his own signature. When Miranda heard, she stormed into his office unannounced. "You can't reverse a personnel action without due process," she snapped. Adrian didn't look up from his desk. "Watch me." His tone was low, steady, the kind of calm that frightened people more than anger. Miranda crossed her arms. "This looks like favoritism." Adrian finally raised his gaze. "It's called fairness." The two words hit her like a slap. Miranda forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Do you realize what kind of precedent this sets?" she asked. Adrian leaned back in his chair. "Yes, a better one." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Miranda turned on her heel, leaving the door open behind her, a silent declaration of war. Adrian exhaled, his jaw tightening. Something had changed inside him, and there was no going back. Downstairs, Emily sat at her desk, pretending to work, though her screen remained blank. A notification popped up, HR meeting cancelled, and her heart stumbled in disbelief. Cancelled, just like that. She didn't know what Adrian had done, but for the first time, the machine that had always crushed her had paused, maybe because, for once, someone had seen her as more than collateral damage. But mercy never came without cost. By noon, the office was a storm of gossip. Photos of her tear-streaked face from the day before began circulating on employee group chats, grainy, cruel, captioned with mock sympathy. The assistant who cried her way to job security. Emily's hands shook as she scrolled through them. Humiliation burned deeper than fear ever had. Adrian heard about it within the hour. "Find out who leaked those," he told his assistant. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp, cold again, the kind of cold that carried purpose. "And shut it down." His assistant nodded, hesitating. "Sir, People are saying you're changing." Adrian looked out at the skyline, his reflection cutting through the city lights. "Good," he said. "Maybe it's time I did." When he called Emily to his office that afternoon, she expected anger, or worse, pity, but instead he said, "I need you to stay home for a few days, with pay." She blinked, confused. "Why?" He met her gaze. "Because right now, you're being watched. And I don't want this company to turn you into a story it can control." His words were strange, almost protective. It made her chest tighten in ways she didn't understand. Miranda watched from her glass office as Emily left, escorted by HR, not as a criminal, but as someone important enough to be guarded, her nails dug into her palm. "He's lost perspective," she muttered to herself. Then, louder, "He's lost control." In that moment, Miranda decided she wouldn't go down quietly. If Adrian Cole wanted to play the hero, she'd make sure the world saw it as weakness. That night, as Emily rode the bus home, the city lights flickered past like memories she couldn't keep. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an unknown number. "Check the blogs." She opened the link, her stomach sinking. There it was, a blurry photo of her on her knees before Adrian Cole, headline blazing in cruel simplicity. "Billionaire CEO shows pity or plays favorites." Emily closed her eyes. The world had found its villain and its victim. By sunrise, Emily's face was everywhere. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, messages from strangers, classmates she hadn't heard from in years, even distant relatives she barely knew. Some called her brave, others called her manipulative. The photo, her on her knees pleading, was already viral, plastered across gossip sites and business pages alike. Each headline told a different version of the same lie. In her small apartment, she sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the screen, until her reflection blurred against the glow. Her name trended alongside Adrian Cole's. "The Ice King melts for his assistant. Corporate compassion or career suicide?" The words didn't feel real. She wanted to turn it all off, to erase herself from the internet, from this city, from her own mistake. But the world doesn't let women disappear, not when they're bleeding publicly. Meanwhile, at Cole Industries, the PR department was in chaos. Adrian stood by the window as 3 advisors argued behind him. Crisis management, damage control, legal response. "We need a statement," one said. "Silence looks like guilt." Adrian didn't move. His reflection in the glass stared back, composed, unreadable, but with a storm gathering behind his eyes. Finally he said, "Then we tell the truth." The room fell silent. Miranda appeared in the doorway, perfectly calm amid the storm. "Truth?" she said, tilting her head. "You think the world cares about truth? They care about image, Adrian, about control." He turned to face her. "Then control isn't what they'll get." Her smile faltered for the first time. "Don't mistake sentiment for strategy," she warned. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. By noon, the company's social feed exploded with reactions to the leaked image. Some employees defended Emily, others mocked her. One anonymous post read, "If this were any of us, we'd be gone by now." The comment section burned with judgment, jealousy, and a strange kind of hope. Adrian read every word. The corporate mask he'd worn for years began to crack under the weight of the noise. Emily ventured outside for the first time that day. On the bus, she caught strangers glancing at her, whispering. A woman offered her a seat. A teenager smiled kindly and handed her a granola bar. The gesture undid her. For a moment, tears blurred the world again, not from shame this time, but from the faint reminder that compassion still existed, even if it wasn't coming from where she expected. Her phone buzzed again. A notification, incoming call, Adrian Cole. Her heart stuttered. She hesitated before answering. "Emily," his voice came through, deep but softer than she'd ever heard it. "Don't respond to anything online, not yet. Let me handle this." She almost laughed. Handle it. It's everywhere. He paused. Then we make it mean something. The line went quiet. At headquarters, Miranda was already spinning the story. She leaked anonymous details to journalists, painting Adrian as a reckless leader ruled by emotion. The market began to tremble. Investors uneasy, partners calling for clarification. She smiled, watching the panic ripple outward. The higher Adrian climbed toward redemption, the easier it would be to pull him down. That evening, Emily opened her window to the cool city air. The sounds of traffic and laughter drifted up from below, so ordinary it almost hurt. She looked at her phone again, scrolling past insults and praise alike, until she reached one comment buried deep in the chaos. Sometimes mercy looks like weakness to those who've never needed it. She read it twice, whispering the words under her breath. Across town, Adrian stared at the same photo that had set the world ablaze. For hours he had studied it, her eyes, her fear, his own expression frozen mid-breath. It wasn't pity he saw now, it was guilt. And under that guilt, something rarer, responsibility. As the city lights burned below him, he made a decision that would ripple far beyond one woman's job. He would face them all. Monday morning arrived with tension so thick it felt like weather. The company cafeteria was silent, the elevators full of whispers. Every screen in Coal Industries flashed the same announcement, mandatory all-hands meeting, 9:00 a.m. Emily, still on leave, watched from home, fingers wrapped around a mug she couldn't bring herself to drink. She didn't know what Adrian planned to say, only that his silence had ended. In the glass auditorium, hundreds of employees filled the seats, murmuring like a restless tide. Adrian stepped onto the stage alone, no entourage, no notes in hand. The lights above him burned white, harsh. He looked out over the crowd, his empire, and for once didn't see statistics. He saw faces. "You've all seen the photo," he began, voice steady but low, "and you've all drawn conclusions. Now it's my turn." The room fell still. Adrian's voice carried across the space, rich and deliberate. "We talk about excellence here, discipline, precision. But somewhere along the way, we stopped talking about dignity." A ripple moved through the crowd. "Last week, a mistake happened under my watch, not hers." He gestured toward the back, though Emily wasn't there. "And I'm here to own it." Miranda sat near the front, her expression sculpted into polite disbelief. "He's digging his own grave," she whispered to a board member beside her. But Adrian continued, unflinching. "We cannot build greatness by stepping over the people who help us reach it. Policy means nothing if it costs us our humanity." The words landed like thunder, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. He paused, letting the silence breathe. "That's why, effective immediately, we're auditing our scheduling system, reinstating paid leave reviews, and launching a discussion about parent support within this company." His gaze swept the room. "We don't just fire people to prove we're strong. Real strength is building something that lasts. And lasts because it's just." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then faintly, a few people began to clap. The sound grew, hesitant at first, then swelling, echoing off the glass walls. Miranda's jaw tightened as applause rolled through the room like a wave. Adrian didn't smile. He only nodded once, as if acknowledging a truth too long ignored. Back home, Emily watched the live stream through tears. She had expected a defense, an excuse. Not this. Not him standing before the world, taking the blame that should have destroyed her. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat sync with the rhythm of his words. For the first time since this nightmare began, she breathed without guilt. When the broadcast ended, the board's private chat lit up like wildfire. "He's gone rogue. This isn't strategy. It's sentiment. We need numbers, not apologies." Miranda read every message, her eyes narrowing with purpose. She began typing her own response. Then maybe it's time to remind him who really runs this company. That afternoon, Adrian's assistant stepped into his office. "Sir, the board wants an emergency meeting. They say it's about investor confidence." Adrian glanced up from his desk. "It's about control," he said quietly. He straightened his tie and stood. Let them talk. But beneath his calm, something darker flickered, the sense that he'd just declared war on his own creation. As evening fell, Emily received a single email from an internal address she didn't recognize. No message, no greeting, just one attached document. She opened it, eyes widening as she read the subject line. "Petition for emergency board vote. Motion to restrict CEO authority." Her stomach dropped. Miranda was striking back. The boardroom smelled of old wood and tension. A dozen executives sat around the glossy table, their suits dark as mourning clothes. Adrian entered without a word, setting his folder neatly before him. Miranda was already there, poised and radiant in crimson, the color of warning. The only sound was the steady tick of the antique clock on the wall, counting down the seconds before someone drew blood. "Thank you for joining us," Miranda began, her voice smooth as silk over steel. "Given recent events, the board felt it necessary to discuss the impact of your impulsive decisions." Adrian leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "Impulsive?" he repeated quietly. "You mean ethical?" A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. She smiled, sharp and bright. "Ethics don't pay dividends, Adrian. You of all people should remember that." One by one, the directors presented charts and forecasts, numbers painted in fear. "Stock has dipped 6%, one said. "Investors want reassurance." Miranda folded her hands gracefully. "And they deserve leadership that prioritizes results, not redemption arcs." Her gaze locked on Adrian. "If you won't protect the company from emotional recklessness, we will." Adrian flipped open his folder. Inside, he'd highlighted internal reports and timestamps, a mosaic of data he'd been reviewing for days. "Before you move to strip authority," he said calmly, "you should see what kind of leadership your results have been buying." He slid a document across the table. Miranda's name appeared at the top of several internal messages. Her smile faltered for the briefest second. She recovered quickly. "I don't appreciate insinuations," she said coldly. "You're grasping, Adrian. I've done nothing improper." He met her gaze. "Then you won't mind transparency." He tapped the folder again. "There are discrepancies in our meeting logs. Dates shifted, notices missing, all tied to the morning you and your assistant adjusted scheduling protocols." The room stiffened. Miranda's expression froze. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Are you suggesting misconduct?" Adrian's tone never rose. "I'm suggesting deliberate sabotage." He turned to the others, his voice steady. "Someone wanted a scapegoat, and they found her. But they underestimated me." Silence fell like snow, cold and suffocating. Every pair of eyes swung to Miranda, whose hand tightened around her pen until her knuckles went white. Miranda laughed softly, though her voice trembled just slightly. "You can't prove anything. Anyone could have edited a calendar entry." Adrian nodded once. "Exactly, which is why I'm asking for a full internal audit. Every system, every department, every name." His words hung in the air like smoke. No one dared interrupt. It was no longer just a meeting. It was a reckoning. Outside the boardroom's glass wall, employees passed by pretending not to look, though every glance betrayed curiosity. Inside, the clock ticked louder, echoing through the stillness. Adrian folded his hands. "You've spent years teaching people to fear mistakes," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time they learn accountability instead." Miranda's mask slipped, not a fall, just a crack. But it was enough. The vote to suspend him never came. The board postponed the motion pending investigation, a hollow phrase that meant Miranda's momentum had stalled. She left first, heels clicking like gunfire on marble, her smile gone but her fury intact. Adrian remained seated, alone with the faint scent of her perfume and the weight of what he'd just set in motion. When he finally stepped into the empty hallway, he saw the city stretching out beneath him, vast, restless, unforgiving. He knew the war wasn't over. He also knew who he needed to call next. Pulling out his phone, he dialed a number he hadn't saved, but memorized anyway. The line rang once before a familiar voice answered softly. "Emily," he said, "I need your help." The boardroom smelled of old wood and tension. A dozen executives sat around the glossy table, their suits dark as mourning clothes. Adrian entered without a word, setting his folder neatly before him. Miranda was already there, poised and radiant in crimson, the color of warning. The only sound was the steady tick of the antique clock on the wall, counting down the seconds before someone drew blood. "Thank you for joining us," Miranda began, her voice smooth as silk over steel. "Given recent events, the board felt it necessary to discuss the impact of your impulsive decisions." Adrian leaned back in his chair, expression unreadable. "Impulsive," he repeated quietly. "You mean ethical?" A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. She smiled, sharp and bright. "Ethics don't pay dividends, Adrian. You of all people should remember that." One by one, the directors presented charts and forecasts, numbers painted in fear. "Stock has dipped 6%, one said. "Investors want reassurance." Miranda folded her hands gracefully, "and they deserve leadership that prioritizes results, not redemption arcs." Her gaze locked on Adrian. "If you won't protect the company from emotional recklessness, we will." Adrian flipped open his folder. Inside, he'd highlighted internal reports and timestamps, a mosaic of data he'd been reviewing for days. "Before you move to strip authority," he said calmly, "you should see what kind of leadership your results have been buying." He slid a document across the table. Miranda's name appeared at the top of several internal messages. Her smile faltered for the briefest second. She recovered quickly. "I don't appreciate insinuations," she said coldly. "You're grasping, Adrian. I've done nothing improper." He met her gaze. "Then you won't mind transparency." He tapped the folder again. "There are discrepancies in our meeting logs. Dates shifted, notices missing, all tied to the morning you and your assistant adjusted scheduling protocols." The room stiffened. Miranda's expression froze. One of the board members cleared his throat. "Are you suggesting misconduct?" Adrian's tone never rose. "I'm suggesting deliberate sabotage." He turned to the others, his voice steady. "Someone wanted a scapegoat, and they found her, but they underestimated me." Silence fell like snow, cold and suffocating. Every pair of eyes swung to Miranda, whose hand tightened around her pen until her knuckles went white. Miranda laughed softly, though her voice trembled just slightly. "You can't prove anything. Anyone could have edited a calendar entry." Adrian nodded once. "Exactly. Which is why I'm asking for a full internal audit. Every system, every department, every name." His words hung in the air like smoke. No one dared interrupt. It was no longer just a meeting. It was a reckoning. Outside the boardroom's glass wall, employees passed by, pretending not to look, though every glance betrayed curiosity. Inside, the clock ticked louder, echoing through the stillness. Adrian folded his hands. "You've spent years teaching people to fear mistakes," he said quietly. "Maybe it's time they learn accountability instead." Miranda's mask slipped. Not a fall, just a crack. But it was enough. The vote to suspend him never came. The board postponed the motion pending investigation, a hollow phrase that meant Miranda's momentum had stalled. She left first, heels clicking like gunfire on marble, her smile gone, but her fury intact. Adrian remained seated, alone with the faint scent of her perfume and the weight of what he'd just set in motion. When he finally stepped into the empty hallway, he saw the city stretching out beneath him, vast, restless, unforgiving. He knew the war wasn't over. He also knew who he needed to call next. Pulling out his phone, he dialed a number he hadn't saved, but memorized anyway. The line rang once before a familiar voice answered softly. "Emily," he said, "I need your help." The office was nearly empty when Emily arrived after dark, her footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. The city outside shimmered against the glass walls, a sea of lights reflecting her nerves. Adrian had asked her to meet privately, his message brief and cryptic: "Bring everything you have from that morning." She didn't know if this was salvation or another trap, but something in his voice had sounded different, almost urgent. When she entered his office, the air felt charged. Adrian stood by the table, sleeves rolled up, a whiteboard behind him covered in notes and timestamps. "I've been reviewing the logs," he said without preamble, "the schedule changes, the deleted emails. Something doesn't add up." Emily placed a folder on the desk. "I kept copies," she said quietly, "in case I ever had to prove I wasn't crazy." His eyes lifted, surprised and impressed. He called in 2 trusted allies from operations, Luis and Priya, night shift analysts who owed him nothing but respected his precision. Together they began reconstructing the week of the incident: email chains, calendar metadata, badge swipe records. The hum of computers filled the silence, the glow of monitors painting their faces blue. Emily traced the timeline with her finger, eyes narrowing. "Look, the meeting time was changed at 6:52 a.m., but the system logged it under Miranda's assistant's credentials." Priya leaned closer. "And then that entry was deleted at 7:04. Someone tried to cover their tracks." Luis frowned, but only an admin could override timestamps. The realization hit them all at once. Emily looked up at Adrian. "That means Miranda knew." He didn't respond immediately, but the muscle in his jaw tightened. He took the marker and circled a line in red. "Then this isn't just negligence," he said softly. "It's intent." The room grew colder as the truth crystallized. Adrian paced slowly, his mind a machine in motion. "If this leaks before we confirm it, she'll twist it, make it look like revenge," he murmured. Emily stepped forward. "So we don't leak it. We prove it." Her tone had changed, no longer trembling, no longer afraid. Adrian noticed the steadiness in her voice, the quiet strength that had replaced desperation. Hours passed. Papers scattered, coffee cooled, exhaustion blurred their focus, yet they kept going, driven by the pulse of purpose. At one point, Emily caught Adrian staring at her, not in pity, but in admiration. "You didn't have to help me," she said. He shook his head. "You didn't deserve to be destroyed." She smiled faintly. "Neither did you." The words lingered longer than either of them expected. By midnight they had everything: timestamp screenshots, deleted audit trails, internal emails showing the manipulation. Emily gathered the printouts with trembling hands. "If you show this to the board, they'll have no choice," she whispered. Adrian nodded slowly. "They'll also come for us both." His tone was calm, but his eyes burned with something fierce. "Then let them." Luis inserted a thumb drive and began transferring the files. "This is it," he said. "Once it's backed up, there's no taking it back." Adrian watched the progress bar inch forward, the soft whir of the machine filling the room. Emily stood beside him, close enough that their reflections merged in the glass, 2 figures bound by truth and risk. When the transfer completed, Luis slid the thumb drive across the desk. Adrian picked it up, holding it between his fingers like a live spark. For a moment, no one moved. Then he turned to Emily and said, "You'll come with me tomorrow. You deserve to be there when we end this." She hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be ready." As the lights dimmed, Adrian locked the drive in his briefcase. The city outside was still alive. Sirens, laughter, the hum of distant chaos. Emily looked out at it all, feeling something she hadn't in weeks. Control. For once, the truth was theirs. Tomorrow, they would walk into the fire together, and this time, they wouldn't burn. The boardroom was packed by morning, a gallery of power dressed in tailored nerves. Cameras were forbidden, but everyone knew this meeting would echo beyond the walls. Adrian stood at the head of the table, briefcase in hand, the weight of truth resting inside it. Emily sat quietly near the end, no longer an assistant, not yet an equal, but something far stronger, a witness. Miranda entered last, her smile rehearsed and unshakable. "Before we begin," she said, "I'd like to revisit the issue of leadership stability." Her voice dripped authority, but Adrian cut across her. "We'll get to that," he said evenly. "First, we need to talk about integrity." He unlocked his case and placed the thumb drive on the table. The air shifted. Everyone sensed it, the calm before revelation. He projected the first email onto the screen. Timestamps, edits, the unmistakable trail of deception. Gasps rippled around the room. "These records show that the meeting Emily Bennett was accused of missing," Adrian said, his tone steady as stone, "was deliberately rescheduled and hidden from her calendar." He turned toward Miranda. "Under your authority." Miranda's mask didn't crack. "That's absurd," she said lightly. "You're basing this on metadata? Anyone could fabricate Adrian clicked again. The next slide showed the server logs, pulled directly from IT archives. Priya's digital signature verified their authenticity. "Fabrication would require admin-level clearance," Adrian replied, "which only 3 people possess. Myself, it, and you." The room fell silent. Miranda's jaw tightened. "You're accusing me of sabotage?" she asked, her tone laced with disbelief. "No," Adrian said, eyes locked on hers. "I'm proving it." He nodded toward Emily. She rose slowly, voice trembling but clear. "I was told I'd failed this company. I didn't. Someone made sure I looked like I did." Her gaze swept the table, and I lost everything because of it. Several board members exchanged glances, unease replacing judgment. One finally asked, "And what do you propose we do about this, Mr. Cole?" Adrian straightened. "We rebuild, not with fear, but with fairness, starting now." He turned back to the screen. "Miranda Vale is suspended pending investigation, effective immediately." The collective inhale that followed was sharp enough to cut air. Miranda's composure fractured at last. "You can't do this," she spat, rising from her chair. "The shareholders—" "We'll see the data," Adrian interrupted, "and they'll see you use this company to settle personal scores." His voice softened then, almost regretful. "You taught everyone to follow rules, Miranda. You just forgot they apply to you too." He turned to the board. "And there's something else. Today, Cole Industries will be launching a fund to support working parents, full transparency in scheduling, paid parental programs and childcare stipends." Murmurs filled the room, half awe, half panic. "It begins now," he continued, "and Emily Bennett will serve as coordinator of the pilot initiative." Emily's breath caught. "Sir, You earned it," he said quietly, cutting her off. "Not because of pity. Because you survived this place at its worst and still believe it can be better." Her eyes shimmered. Around them the board sat frozen, stunned by the unthinkable. A billionaire choosing humanity over power. As the meeting adjourned, journalists outside the glass doors shouted questions. Adrian ignored them all. He looked at Emily and whispered, "They'll call this a mistake." She smiled faintly through her tears. "Then let it be the right one." Lee. And for the first time since his empire began, Adrian Cole walked out not as a legend, but as a man, one who'd finally done the unthinkable. By dawn the next day, the world had already chosen its sides. News outlets replayed clips of the board meeting, dissecting every frame, every syllable. The billionaire who broke his own rules. Coal Industries faces investor panic. Stocks dipped sharply at opening bell, red lines plunging down screens like open wounds. Inside his penthouse, Adrian watched the chaos unfold, the city reflected in his glass of untouched whiskey. Down the street, Emily sat in a crowded cafe, her phone lighting up with headlines she couldn't bear to read. Her name was still trending, tied to his in a storm of opinions that blurred compassion with scandal. One headline read, "Was it mercy or manipulation?" She shut the screen off and exhaled slowly. The noise was unbearable, but beneath it something had shifted. People were talking about fairness, about change. Maybe that was enough. At headquarters, employees whispered less fearfully now. Some even smiled as they passed each other in the halls, as though the air itself had softened. HR sent out the first memo about new parental protections. A junior analyst messaged Emily directly. "Thank you. My sister was fired when she got pregnant last year. You changed things." Emily stared at the message until her eyes blurred. For once, her tears didn't sting. But compassion had a cost, and Adrian was paying it. Shareholders demanded explanations. Investors pulled funding, and the media hunted his every word. "We can weather this," his CFO insisted. "Not if we go back to who we were," Adrian replied quietly. He stood at the window, phone in hand, thumb hovering over Emily's name. He didn't call, not yet. Some things, he'd learned, had to heal without interference. That evening, Emily arrived at the clinic for her appointment. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the air, but this time it didn't make her stomach turn. When the nurse dimmed the lights and the ultrasound flickered to life, a heartbeat echoed softly through the room, steady, rhythmic, alive. She smiled through tears. "You're strong," she whispered. "Stronger than I ever was." In the waiting room, Adrian sat quietly, wearing a plain grey jacket that made him nearly unrecognizable. He wasn't there as a CEO, not as a savior, just as someone who needed to know she was okay. When Emily stepped out and saw him, her breath caught. "You didn't have to come," she said softly. He shrugged, looking almost shy. "I wanted to make sure you weren't alone." They sat together in silence for a long while. The city outside the clinic pulsed with life, indifferent yet strangely comforting. "You lost a lot for me," Emily said finally. Adrian shook his head. "I lost things I should have never valued more than people." He looked down at his hands, the ones that had built and broken lives. "You reminded me who I used to be." When they left, cameras flashed from across the street, vultures hungry for scandal. Adrian instinctively stepped in front of her, shielding her from the flashes. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "They'll find something else to feed on soon." She nodded, gripping his arm. "Maybe. But what we did, it'll stay." For a moment neither of them moved, suspended in the fragile peace of understanding. By morning, the company's stock began to stabilize. Employees shared stories online, not of gossip, but gratitude. He listened. She stood up. "We're finally being seen." The tide had turned, just barely, but enough to matter. Adrian scrolled through the comments in silence, the corner of his mouth twitching upward for the first time in months. Then a new notification appeared. "Breaking. Former COO Miranda Vale speaks out. The truth about the viral assistant." Adrian's faint smile disappeared. He clicked the link, jaw tightening as her face appeared on screen, perfectly composed. "He thinks he's redeemed himself," she said, eyes glittering. "But redemption is fragile, and I'm not finished." The storm wasn't over. It was coming back stronger. The interview spread across every major network within hours. Miranda Vale, calm and venomous, spoke from a sleek Manhattan studio, as though she'd rehearsed the role her entire life. "People think they've witnessed compassion," she told the camera, "but what they saw was manipulation, a calculated act from a desperate woman and a man blinded by guilt." Her words slithered across screens, slick and deliberate. By noon, Emily's name was trending again, this time with hashtags filled with doubt. Emily watched from her apartment, heart pounding. The footage cut to the leaked hallway video, the one she'd prayed would never see daylight. There she was, on her knees before Adrian, tearful, pleading. The sound was muffled, stripped of context. To the world, it didn't look like courage or honesty. It looked like seduction, betrayal, pity's favorite disguise. The comment section was a battlefield she dared not enter. Across town, Adrian slammed his office door shut, as the same footage replayed on every screen in the media room. His legal team urged restraint. "Let it fade," they said. "Silence is strength." But his silence had already cost too much. "She doesn't deserve this," he muttered, jaw tight. His reflection in the window stared back, older, wearier. "I won't let her carry this alone." Miranda wasn't finished. She released internal emails out of context, twisting facts until fiction looked cleaner. Her tone in every interview was flawless, regretful, reasonable, rehearsed. "He's unraveling," she told one reporter, her voice soft with false concern. "And she's playing him. It's tragic, really." Investors began to panic again. Board members whispered about replacing him for stability. Miranda's poison was working. Emily tried to stay silent, to stay invisible, but the hate followed her offline. Knocks on her door, phone calls from strangers, reporters camped beneath her window. The stress gnawed at her until she could barely sleep. One night she sat on her bed, clutching her belly, whispering to the baby. "They don't know you," she said softly. "They don't know what we've been through." Her tears fell quietly, but they didn't break her this time. They steeled her. The next morning, she received a message from Adrian. "Meet me in the atrium at noon." She almost didn't go, but something in her refused to hide anymore. When she arrived, the building felt like it was holding its breath. Employees stood clustered in silence as Adrian addressed the cameras for what the media was calling the reckoning. His tie was gone, his sleeves rolled, his expression stripped of armor. He began calmly. "A private moment was made public, twisted into something unrecognizable. That's the world we live in. But I won't apologize for compassion." The room stirred. "Emily Bennett doesn't owe this company shame. If you think kindness is weakness, then maybe we've all forgotten what strength actually means." His voice echoed through the atrium, controlled fury wrapped in grace. Miranda, watching live from a studio, smiled thinly. "He's falling right into it," she whispered to her producer. "He'll lose control." But Adrian didn't. He turned toward the crowd, his tone softening. "I've made mistakes, many, but this woman didn't manipulate me. She reminded me that no policy, no profit, no reputation is worth more than a person's dignity." The audience erupted in applause. Back at her apartment, Emily stood frozen before the screen, tears rolling freely. For the first time, he hadn't saved her. He'd stood beside her, and she realized she couldn't let him face the backlash alone. Heart pounding, she opened her laptop, set up her camera, and pressed record. Her voice trembled at first, but then steadied. "You've all seen me cry," she began. "Now let me tell you why." She spoke for 6 minutes straight about fear, resilience, motherhood, and the right to be seen as human. No corporate jargon, no filters. just truth. And when she ended with the words, "Dignity isn't a privilege, it's a right," something irreversible happened. Within hours, her video had more views than Miranda's lies. The world was listening, and this time, it was believing her. The morning after Emily's video went live, the internet felt different. Comment sections that once seethed with cruelty now overflowed with support. Strangers thanking her for her courage. Employees from other companies sharing their own stories of humiliation and silence. Her face was still everywhere, but now it wasn't a symbol of shame. It was defiance, strength, truth, unvarnished. The world had chosen which story to believe. At Cole Industries, Adrian stepped out of the elevator to the sound of applause. Not rehearsed, not corporate, real. Employees lined the corridor, some smiling, some teary-eyed. For once, no one looked afraid of him. Miranda's office door stood open and empty, her nameplate gone, her desk cleared. The board had voted overnight, unanimous. Her reign of control was over. Justice had come quietly, but completely. Adrian entered the atrium, where reporters waited behind ropes and cameras flashed like lightning. He didn't flinch. "Our company lost its way," he said simply, "but we found it again through accountability." His voice carried warmth now, not command. "I once believed strength meant perfection, but strength is admitting when you've failed and choosing to grow anyway." Behind him, a new banner hung. Cole Industries, building with dignity. Across the city, Emily watched the press conference from her living room, hands resting on her belly. Her face appeared briefly on the screen as Adrian continued. "No one here should ever have to beg for their humanity. Emily Bennett taught us that." The room erupted in applause. She smiled faintly, whispering, "You did it, Adrian." But deep down, she knew. They had done it together. Later that afternoon, she returned to the building for the first time since everything began. Security greeted her with soft nods instead of suspicion. The atrium felt warmer somehow, the sterile glass now bathed in gold from the setting sun. She walked straight to the shred bin in the corner, pulling a folded paper from her bag. The termination notice. It trembled once between her fingers, then disappeared into the machine with a soft, satisfying hum. Adrian appeared beside her, his presence quiet, grounding. "I thought that deserved a better ending," he said gently. Emily turned to him, eyes shimmering. It got one. They stood there for a moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of an office that finally felt human. No more walls between them, just understanding. He offered a small smile. "So, coordinator of parental initiatives, think you can handle rebuilding my company's soul?" She laughed. "One policy at a time." Weeks passed, and headlines changed, as they always do. But inside Cole Industries, something lasting had taken root. Employees spoke more freely, managers listened. The atmosphere that once fed on fear now ran on purpose. And somewhere in the corner office, a CEO who had once been marble learned to listen, not to data, but to hearts. Months later, Emily stood in a softly lit clinic again, the ultrasound screen glowing before her. The doctor smiled, pointing to the rhythmic flicker on the monitor. "There it is," he said, "healthy and strong." She smiled, tears spilling freely. A knock at the door, Adrian holding a small bouquet of lilies, looking awkward but hopeful. "I didn't want to miss it this time," he murmured. She reached for his hand, placing it gently on her stomach. The tiny heartbeat pulsed beneath their palms. Fragile, fierce, undeniable. For a long moment, neither spoke. The past had been cruel, but it had given them this, a second chance at grace. Outside, the city glowed
And somewhere
in twilight,
between that flicker of
alive
life and the
endless.
warmth of his hand in hers, Emily realized the truth. The unthinkable wasn't the cruelty of their beginning. It was the kindness that survived it. She looked up at him and smiled. "We're going to be okay." And for the first time, Adrian Cole, the man who once ruled by fear, believed it.